Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at regulations and rebellion, Numbers chapters 15 and 16 in our continuing study of the book of Numbers. In the book of Numbers, the outline we've been using, chapters 1 through 10 have us at Mount Sinai, and that was getting ready for the trip. Then we saw last time where we went from Mount Sinai to Kadesh, and there was that big rebellion at Kadesh, and as a result, the Israelites were told that they would be wandering in the wilderness, and that's what we're coming to now, these wilderness wanderings. And finally, when we get to the end of the book, we're going to see the end of the journey as they're getting ready to go into the Promised Land. So we have the older generation, and we're still in that portion as we come to chapter 15. Next, at the end of that, we're going to see the new generation come forth. Now, in chapters 11 through 14, we saw Israel sinning, and now as we enter this new section, which are going to embark upon the wilderness wanderings, we're going to see God giving laws. And that really strikes us at first as odd until we remember where Paul asked the question, why was the law given? And he says, well, it was added because of transgressions. You know, that was, according to God, ordained through the angels by the agency of a mediator, until the promises of the Old Testament, the promise of the seed of the woman, had been fulfilled. And so Israel sins, and God gives laws, and Israel sins, and God gives more laws, and that's where we come to here in chapter 15, where we have the ritual regulations that are given in chapter 15 about sacrifices. So God says in chapter 15, verse 1, now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, and say to them, when you enter into the land which you are to live, which I'm giving you, then make an offering by fire to the Lord, a burnt offering or a sacrifice to fulfill a special vow, or as a freewill offering, or in your appointed times to make a soothing aroma to the Lord from the herd or from the flock. Now that's what we read about back in Leviticus chapters 1 through 5. So these ritual regulations, first of all, there's the requirements for the grain offerings. It's to be with one lamb, with a ram, with a young bull. The offering of a cake from the first of the ground. The offering for unintentional sin of the whole community. So that was the grain offerings, the offerings from the fruit of the ground, or the sin offering or guilt offering, summarized here. The offering for unintentional sin, whether it was the whole community or of an individual. But the person who does anything defiantly, whether he's native or an alien, in other words, what about the intentional sin? And that's what we see here. The person who does anything defiantly, whether he's native or an alien, that one is blaspheming the Lord. And that person shall be cut off from among his people, because he has despised the word of the Lord and has broken his commandment. That person shall be completely cut off. His guilt will be on him. So we have the laws of the offerings and the general offerings, and we closed with that question of what about the defiant sin? And now we're given the example of one who sinned defiantly. In other words, he knew what to do. He didn't do it. He deliberately didn't do it. It wasn't just a mistake. And he went out and rebelled against God. And here's the story. Now, while the sons of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering wood on the Sabbath day. He apparently knew what day it was, and he said, well, doggone it, I don't care. I'm going to just go do what I want to do. Now, the one who found him gathering wood those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him in custody because it had not been declared what should be done to him. What do you do with somebody who just says, I'm going to sin because I want to sin? Then the Lord said to Moses, the man shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. And you say, wow, for not keeping the Sabbath, for picking up sticks on the Sabbath, for, as we might say in our New Testament era, for going to church, or for not going to church on Sunday? That's what we do? The New Testament gives us a New Testament application, not that we're supposed to be putting people to death, but we read in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 8 and following, for if Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that. So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. You see, the Sabbath isn't done away with. There's something about the Sabbath that continues. For the one who has entered his rest has himself also rested from his works, as God did from his. How do you enter into the New Testament Sabbath rest? You come to Jesus and you trust in him, and if you don't, if you reject him, you have happened to you what happened to that man back then. Only it's not a temporal death, it is an eternal death. Because God takes his rest seriously. God takes Jesus seriously. There is a place of work. In fact, there was a place of work in the Bible. It was called the law. And there's a place of rest, and that's the cross, of which the Sabbath was only a picture. And we're called to enter into his rest. So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. Now, we come next to the Korah rebellion. We had an individual rebel at the end of chapter 15. In Numbers chapter 16, now we're going to see a group of rebels. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, the son of and On, the son of Peleth, the sons of Reuben. All these, and notice they're from two tribes. They're from Levi and they're from Reuben, and they took action. And they rose up before Moses, together with some of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly, men of a name, men of renown. So we have the sons of Levi and we have the sons of Reuben, and they come up against Moses. They assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy. Every one of them," God had said, you're going to be a holy nation. So there's a sense in which this is true. "And the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" What makes you the boss, Moses and Aaron? When Moses heard this, he fell on his face, and he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, "Tomorrow morning the Lord will show who is his and who is holy, and will bring him, that one, near to himself, even the one whom he will choose, and he will bring that one near to himself." Then Moses went to Korah. "Hear now, you sons of Levi. Is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the congregation of Israel?" Because Korah was a Levite, and the Levites did have special privileges to bring you near to himself, to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to minister to them. Yes, Korah and the rest of the Levites had that privilege. "And that he has brought you near, Korah, and all your brothers, sons of Levi, with you. Are you seeking for the priesthood also?" You see, Korah wasn't satisfied with what he had. He wanted more. Maybe he'd been reading that little book, The Prayer of Jabez, that, expand your horizons or something. And he wanted more. And more hadn't been given to him. And there's a lesson here that he ought to have been satisfied with that which God had given. Well, then Moses sent a summons to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, "We will not come up. Is it not enough that you have brought us out of a land flowing of milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness, but you would have also lorded over us?" In other words, they're sort of ticked of what happened in the previous chapters. They're upset with these wilderness wanderings, and they're blaming Moses instead of accepting responsibility on their own. "Indeed, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor have you given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Would you put out the eyes of these men?" Now that's a figure of speech there when you says, "Would you put out the eyes of these men?" It actually, we have a similar figure of speech. We talk about pulling the wool over the eyes of somebody, and that's the idea here. Would you trick them? "We won't come up." Well, Moses became very angry and said to the Lord, "Do not regard their offering." In the past we've seen Moses interceding for Israel, and this time God has Moses coming before him, and it's not that he's interceding for them, he's actually interceding against them. This is what we can call an imprecatory prayer. Sometimes we have what we call the imprecatory psalms, the psalms that say, "Lord, get him." And that's what Moses prays Do not regard their offering. I have not taken a single donkey from them, nor have I done harm to them. They're speaking against me. Lord, do something. Don't take regard their offering. And then Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, with the elders of Israel following him, and he spoke to the congregation, saying, Depart now from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing that belongs to them, or you will be swept away in all their sin. There's times where you need to separate yourselves from a rebellious man. And that's what's taking place here. As he finished speaking all these words, the ground that was under them split open, and the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed them up and their households and all the men who belonged to Korah with their possessions. They go right down into the grave. And so they and all that belonged to them went down alive to Sheol. Sometimes we translate that hell, but really here it means the grave. And the earth, you didn't even have to bury them. God took care of that. And the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. Woe! Woe to them, Jude chapter 1 says. Verse 11. Woe to them, for they have gone the way of Cain, and for pay they have rushed headlong into the error of Balaam. We're going to see that later on in the book of Numbers. And they have perished in the rebellion of Korah. It is possible today to do the same thing that Korah did. And so that story is a warning story for us today. To not walk in the way of rebellion, but to walk in a way that is trusting and obedient and submissive to the Lord. These are the men, Jude goes on to say, these are the men who are hidden reefs in your love feasts, when they feast with you without fear, carrying for themselves clouds without water, carried along by winds, autumn trees without fruit, doubly dead. Sometimes they can look good. An autumn tree actually looks very pretty, but there's no fruit there. Clouds that can look wonderful, but there's no water in them. Wild waves of the sea, casting up their own shame like foam. They have all sorts of great activity. Wandering stars, for whom the black darkness has been reserved forever. Oh, that's a terrible warning. You don't want to be following false teachers. You don't want to be associating with rebellious people. But on the next day, all the congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. I'm not sure if I would have been doing that, except that how often do we grumble? And notice they were grumbling, saying, You are the ones who have caused the death of the Lord's people. And it came about, however, when the congregation had assembled against Moses and Aaron, that they turned toward the tent of meeting. Behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. God showed up! And then Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Get away from among this congregation, that I may consume them instantly. And they fell on their faces. God says, okay, they're grumbling against you, Moses, but really they're grumbling against me. So I'll destroy them. And Moses said to Aaron, and we've seen Moses in the past intercede, but here Moses says to Aaron, Take your censer and put it in fire, or put in it fire from the altar, and lay incense on it, and then bring it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them, for wrath has gone forth from the Lord. Plague has begun. The judgment that God pronounced was already taking place. And so Aaron is told to go and intercede on behalf of the people by taking fire from the altar and bringing it to the congregation and making atonement for them. Then Aaron took it as Moses had spoken and ran into the midst of the assembly. He doesn't just walk, he runs. For behold, the plague had begun among the people, so he put on the incense and made atonement for the people. He took his stand between the dead and the living, so that the plague was checked. And what Aaron does for Israel, Christ has done for us, as he has taken his stand between us and that which would mean for us eternal death. He has taken our sins upon himself, and he has made atonement for us, so that we can be made one with God. And we are called to repent and believe in our high priest, Jesus Christ, the righteous one.